In this video, let's look at the magic of sustained growth using the rule of 70. Then we can look at the key factors of economic growth, and after that we can look at labor productivity. The magic of sustained growth is explained by rule of 70, which is 70 over the annual percentage growth rate. Let's see how we use the rule of 70. Say for example, the real gross domestic product per person in US is equal to $50,000. I need to know in how many years this will double in value. Going back to the definition here, so the rule of 70 was showing us the number of years it takes for the level of any variable to double. Say I'm looking at real GDP per person. I need to know in how many years 50,000 becomes 100,000. When I'm using the rule of 70, I am not using any of these numbers, 50,000 or 70,000. What I'm just using is 70 over the percentage growth rate. I have 5 different percentage growth rates given to us. And when I'm trying to calculate the number of years, I'm just going to look at this number 70. This is going to be divided by the percent growth rate. Say for example, if I circle this one, the percentage growth rate of real GDP per person is 7%. The rule of 70, when I'm using it, it will be 70 over 7. This is equal to 10 years, or in 10 years 50,000 becomes 100,000. It can be any number here. I can take 5%, 10%, 1%, 2%. I can even take 20%, 30%. The only key is divide 70 over the percentage growth rate. Do not use this percentage sign. This is if you do, this will mess up your calculation. Next, we look at the 2 key factors for a country's long-term economic growth. This is what we are interested in, looking at the long-run economic growth. The number 1 factor is property rights. The property rights should be clear, public, should be clearly enforced and equally applicable to all members of the society, and property rights is going to lead to economic growth. Take a look at this example of this video that I just posted here. It talks about property rights in rural China back in 1978. And we were looking at this province in China, can't really pronounce it, Xiogang province, and how some economic reforms in this small rural economy made China self-sufficient and led to economic growth. Next, we need to have well-defined contractual rights. And contractual rights are based on people entering into contracts with each other. And we use the legal system here. According to the World Bank, a country's legal system is effective if and only if it upholds property rights and contractual rights. Now we can look at the next slide, which talks about long-term economic growth. This can be sustained from labor productivity. Labor productivity is defined as real gross domestic product over labor hours. That means total output over the number of hours worked by and worker. What determines labor productivity? One of the important factors is human capital, and the definition is basically the accumulated knowledge, the skills, the education, the experience, the expertise the average worker accumulates in an economy. The next factor for labor productivity is technological change, which is a combination of both invention and innovation. By invention, we mean advances in knowledge. By innovation is putting those advances in knowledge for further use. As for example, the transistor was invented in 1947. We did not stop here. We kept on using the technology for varied products, as for example, smartphones, computers, and laptops. Next, we look at economies of scale. This deals with cost advantages some industries possess due to the size. As for example, if the size of the facility or the size of the factory goes up, the long-run average cost will go down. What comes to my mind is looking into the example of Walmart. The size is huge and definitely the long-run average cost is quite low. I would say it's smaller than the long-run average cost of any gas station. Okay. Next, we look at the sources of economic growth. We can look into the production function from a micro perspective, and we can look into the aggregate production function from a macro perspective. So the production function does what? So production function is telling us how we use our inputs to produce output. We are converting all our inputs to output. What are the inputs in the production process? The inputs in the production process are definitely the workforce or the labor. Then human capital. Examples of human capital are skills, expertise, in-job knowledge. What are physical capital? What is physical capital? Example of physical capital is machinery and equipments. I'm going to combine all these inputs and I will produce output. And this output is shown by the gross domestic product. So this is what the production process looks like, or production function looks like. I am combining all my inputs and what I am getting is an output. By output, I mean the final product. You can think of your car as a final product, and you can think of what goes in the production of a car. Alright, the next one we are looking at is the GDP per capita. Basically, we are dividing the human capital, the physical capital, and technology per person to get the gross domestic product per person. Okay, then it goes on and talks about the rate of productivity growth and how it is related to GDP per capita. So basically, the rate of productivity growth, if this increases the gross domestic product per capita, that will also go up. The easy definition here is labor productivity is equal to real GDP over aggregate hours. Or I can write real gross domestic product is equal to labor productivity times the aggregate hours. How will the real gross domestic product increase? The real gross domestic product will go up if labor productivity increases or aggregate hours increases or both labor productivity and aggregate hours are increasing. I can use some numbers here. Say initially my real GDP is equal to 10 and my labor productivity is equal to 5. Aggregate hours is equal to 2. So these are the old numbers. Now let's take some new values here. Say the labor productivity increased from 5 to 6. Aggregate hours increased from 2 to 4. The new value of real GDP will be equal to 24. So basically real GDP went up when either one of the other or both went up. So that is all in for this slide, for this presentation. Thank you very much.